or to cycle through a list of things to remember while they're racing? Is it all racing by the seat of the pants and the talented ones just manage to manage their thoughts very well through the racing? How does it work?
Well, the fitter ones handle it a lot better than the unfit ones, of course, and these days this is why the trainers have come into it, this is why the physical rigours and all these things have improved, and special programs designed. But at the end of it, of course, the more testing you do in a race car, the fitter you are, so therefore your intake of information is greater. And of course, there's a thing called mechanical sympathy. To finish first you must finish. So you have to learn to work with your car, make sure you don't over-rev it, make sure you don't miss any gear changes, because if you do miss a gear change, you do over-rev it. These days they've built in rev limiters, push-button gear changes, so more concentration can go, and all the telemetry is basically wired back to the pit. So if the temperature gauge is shifting or the oil gauge is shifting, all these things you are advised by your panel back in the pit who are watching the computers for any shift in the telemetry on the car and advising the driver of where he is, what the wear and tear is, because all your fuel consumptions are done in practice. You know at what lap you're going to come into the pit. You know at what lap you are going to change tyres, give or take, depending whether oil gets down or depending whether the weather alters, because there's no point in saying I'll be in 30 laps for a change of tyres and the weather closes in and you can no longer operate on slick tyres, you're on wet tyres. So once again, the advice and the decision making and the tactician basically is in the pit. But it is a millisecond world, whereas you've got to be able to take your radio transmission in and assess it, and sometimes they're a bit unkind. They'll come on just right in the middle of a passing move where you're working down to very close tolerances, because tracks, if you get offline, all the rubber that's being worn, the little bits and pieces of rubber, form like ball bearings on the offline situation, because as the cars go through they blow the rubber dust away. But after a while, halfway through a race, you can't get off the proven line without a great deal of difficulty, because you run onto the ball bearings of rubber. And you've got very little traction available, because you can really halve your traction rate. So therefore, in between your radio transmissions, in between assessing what the weather's doing, in between assessing are you on the limit, will the car stand the limit, if you've got some mechanical problem, i.e. you suddenly can't select one particular gear, all 6-speed gearboxes these days, you then have to strike a compromise. And sometimes you start to get a little bit of oil surge on a corner, because these things are pulling better than 1.5 Gs in the middle of a corner, so it's very hard to stabilise the oil sometimes, especially if you're getting an oil loss and there's no smoke to indicate that oil loss has taken place, except the temperature gauge is climbing, and then you start to get oil surge. And you've got to be able to pick that up on the gauge straight away with the warning lights and dip the clutch in the corner till you can straighten the car out, so you don't explode the engine, you can get it back to the pit. But once you get to that stage, you've dropped out of the top contenders anyway. But it is a lot better to get it back to the pit than blow the back side out of around about 80,000 to 100,000 bucks worth of engine, depending on what it costs or what it's worth. And a modern engine these days is a very specialised engine that revs to 22,000 revs and generates out of 3 litres, close to 500 horsepower. So, it's once again your question, you can't answer it in detail, but it is what skills you have, and the skills of the man are showing. And if you have 2 drivers, and one will be within 0.5 of the other driver in lap times, identical setups in the car, one's experiencing understeer, which means you're using too much lock on the front end of the car, and the others experience an oversteer, which means the back is stepping out, so you don't need any more lock on the front because the back's already stepping out. But one driver has the balance of the car and working with it on identical setups, and the other one's experiencing trouble. So before you make the adjustment on the car, the driver must be able to get down to the quicker driver's time, or otherwise he's working against his motor car. So these things crop up in the graph, and you can see where one driver's getting on the accelerator and on the brakes, and where he's flat through a corner and the other one's having a lift. So the complex nature of the whole thing, and it's no good a driver coming in and saying, I'm flat through that corner, I can't go any faster, because the downloading of the onboard computer says you're not flat, here's your accelerator there. But under the pressure with the adrenaline, he may think he's flat, genuinely thinks he's flat, and yet he's probably still got an eighth of accelerator that he doesn't know what to do with. And if you are near the limit and you are juggling with your well-being, it can appear you are flat, when you are not.
Are you willing to venture another question? Good answer.
Well, it was straightforward and simple, wasn't it?
With the parity of the cars, and especially in something like V8 supercars with a very similar, the teams and drivers themselves placing a lot of emphasis on the exercise regimes that these guys undertake.
Yes, I think they've all learned internationally, and if we look at V8 supercars and things like that, and we get it into the right context, it's entertaining racing, and they are good guys. And our best bloke, I suppose, is Craig Lowndes in the V8 supercars. But if he went overseas, which he's tried a couple of times with considerable backing, that they're not a top 10 finisher. You know, they haven't got the skills, they're not up to that professionalism, so therefore it is very difficult for them to survive in that world. But the format of overseas, from the tyre technology to the driver technology to the stuff, is tried to be adhered to. And the money is not here to start with. To have that sort of infrastructure is vastly different. I don't know what Craig Lowndes' signing on fee is, but it's vastly different from the 10, 15 million that it cost to sign Michael Schumacher on, who probably needs a 3-year contract, which is probably directly or indirectly going to cost 50 million to keep the bloke contracted. Whereas Craig Lowndes' that infrastructure just doesn't exist. And that support, you've only got to look at the sale of motor books in this country to overseas. It's about a 100th of what gets sold over there. Probably our best publication may make 14,000 units or 18,000 units, and it's not hard to run to sales of 750,000 for the popular motor books over there on a weekly basis. So, yeah, to answer your question, it's all tried, but it's at a much lower level.
Just one more question. No more questions?
It's either very boring or very overpowering, so you can split it up the middle, yeah.
Last chance.
I've got a question actually.
Here we go.
How would you rate the stability of all-wheel drive cars as opposed to two-wheel drive cars?
The stability of four-wheel drive cars is...
WRX, for example.
yeah, well, it's not really an argument how you rate it, because a four-wheel drive vehicle with viscous couplings, which is hydraulic couplings and stuff like that, and a good management system, is considerably better at a level to start with at a normal road vehicle. You wouldn't know whether you're in a two-wheel drive vehicle or a four-wheel drive vehicle. But once you start to move these things up in a usable area, i.e. in a sporting mode, then there is no comparison. The four-wheel drive in the wet, on the dirt, on any condition that you like to bring into the situation, providing you don't get into the aerodynamics of wings and things like that, which are great compensatory things, because the wind can pick up an awful lot of downforce, which eliminates the efficiency of the four-wheel drive. But vehicle for vehicle, the four-wheel drive is, once it gets to a sporty type of driving, is considerably safer. The percentage, I would say, is around about 30%, which seems to be the general accepted thing, 30% safer. Even stopping and certainly accelerating, cornering, providing you are in the hands of professional people. But there's been an awful lot of severe accidents, and the insurance companies are very, and that is your fuse box when you look at why does it cost so much to insure a four-wheel drive. Because people buy four-wheel drives, and then the young and enthusiast has to impress his friends why he's bought this four-wheel drive and what it does. And of course the accident rate with four-wheel drives is considerably higher, because the advantages can only be shown as a disadvantage in the inexperienced hands. So, you know, once again, it's a double-edged sword. All the skills that they put into the engineering side of it can be quickly undone with enthusiasm.
When I last met Frank, I asked him, and this is a motor control question, I asked him what proportion of driving skill does perception play? If I remember correctly, Frank said about 90%. Is that what you said?
That's what I said. Yeah.
I think that's an insightful comment from an expert in motor racing driving. That motor control, the control of your motor, is not so much what we normally think of in terms of controlling neurons and what have you, but the perception of it.
Yep. It is a professional golfer standing on the tee, getting a mental picture of where that ball is taking off from the club and where it's going to land. The average golfer stands up and is hopeful of hitting it. Hopeful.
On that note, Frank, I think we will have to thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.